Best of Dogman Volume 8.
Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
10 of our scariest Dogman stories. Let's start the countdown with our first story. The Rabid Dogman, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. When I was a kid, I was a huge fan of werewolf movies. I'm not anymore. These days, werewolf movies bring out the post-traumatic stress disorder in me, and I become unable to function. Sometimes it's just for a few seconds. Other times I can be essentially put out of action for days. I find myself unable to think clearly. My heart beats too fast. I sweat uncontrollably. My hands shake. And I'm just about useless until it passes. The most frustrating part is the feeling that I have absolutely no control over this shell shock when it hits me. I guess I loved werewolf movies because they seemed like fantasies. I could be scared but still feel safe, since everyone knows there's no such thing as a werewolf. Well, maybe there really is no such thing as a werewolf. I wouldn't know. I've never seen one. But I do know one thing for sure. There certainly is something that I call a Dogman. It's difficult even typing about him. I feel painfully ill all over just thinking about him. But I know that the Dogman is not paranormal, and I know for a fact it's a real, natural, organic animal. Not something out of my imagination or from another reality. Paranormal things are like ghosts. Ghosts don't get disease. Only real animals do. I know what I'm saying because I almost got killed by a Dogman. A diseased Dogman who clearly had rabies. This was when I was 12. I remember it like it happened earlier today, even though this was 14 years ago. It's the story of how the first half of my life ended and the second half began. This was the day I lost my innocence. I can imagine you in my head saying, "Cut the personal garbage and get straight to the Dogman." Well, if you had gone through what I went through, you'd stall each time before telling this story too. It's terrifying just thinking back on it. Okay, here we go. This all happened between Halloween and Thanksgiving in earlier mid-November. My parents had both gotten 3 weeks off that month, and we were going to drive around, visiting locations, camping on nights when the weather was warm and dry enough. My parents were on a roadside attractions kick, wanting my brother Joe and me to see their generation's version of America before it disappeared completely. Joe and I were more interested in this new TV show called Lost, which we were missing episodes of due to this road trip. So we were miserable, and our parents kept telling us to remember how great this was because life was going to go downhill after this. Little did they know how right they were. So one night, that was really too cold and windy to be camping. We camped anyway, somewhere either in Pennsylvania or New Jersey. We were using old school paper maps, so I was never really sure where we were. I didn't have to know. I was too young to drive anyway. I remember that Joe and I had begged them to get a motel room or two for the night. We both would have preferred sleeping on the rug in their room to the damp floor of this cold, haunted-looking forest. I had to go to the bathroom just as we were settling in to sleep in our large family-sized tent, and I wanted my brother or my dad to go with me. The forest was really dark, and there could have been anything out there, from a bear to a large cat to a sicko to, well, the Jersey Devil for all I knew. Neither of them had to go, so my mother offered to go with me instead. I was 12, so I decided I would rather get kidnapped by Bigfoot than have my mother help me out in this situation. So off I went into the forest alone at night. Like all 12-year-old kids, I imagined I was going to see a monster. Unlike most other 12-year-old kids, though, when I walked between some bushes to find a private place to go, I actually, literally, almost walked into an actual, real-life monster. I have no idea what it was doing there. It was just standing. My first impression was that I had entered a fairy tale. Here was the big bad wolf standing in the forest, and he was shaving. Yes, he looked like he was shaving because he had shaving cream all over his face. That's what it looked like in the dark. What was he doing? He was staring in my direction and twitching. He wasn't staring directly at me. He was sort of staring over my left shoulder into space. I think it had been looking in that direction since before I had come through the bush. Although nothing in the world made sense for me anymore, I made a logical decision for myself at this point. Without reversing direction, I just untook the step I had taken walking through the bush. I realized I no longer needed to go to the bathroom. The sight of that creature had taken care of that for me. I sort of moonwalked back to the tent and got in, shivering and unable to talk to the others. I looked at them and tried to form words. It felt sort of like sleep paralysis when you're trying to speak or scream and nothing comes out. Then someone noticed my aroma. Both my parents combined the lost expression on my face with the ammonia smell and realized I'd just had some sort of trauma in the night. My mother grew concerned, and my father grew annoyed and critical. Both of them were shushed by my brother Joe, who wanted us all to listen to a sound in the woods. It was the strangest sound I had ever heard, like an insane man combined with a giant monster. I knew where the sound was coming from, and I was now openly weeping. The words all spilled out in super fast form like a dam had just burst. I told them it was a big man with a dog's head and he had shaving cream all over his face. My father said, "He's seen a rabid dog or wolf," and began issuing orders to my brother and mom about what to take and what to leave and how we were going to run to the car. He grabbed me and carried me, which I was grateful for. He and I were in the car, and I could hear my mother and brother slamming the doors behind us. We were safe. Or so I thought. Of course, you know the car wouldn't start right away. It was a cold night, like I said before. My father turned the key again and again. I began to relax and close my eyes, looking to escape this nightmare for some good dreams for a while. Then it was there, in my side window, slamming its face against the glass. The Dogman got its foam all over the place as it insanely slammed its head again into my window. The glass cracked. My mother and brother were screaming at my father to start the engine as though he weren't already trying. All I could do was stare directly into the eyes of death. The Dogman was so crazed that its eyes were crossed, its teeth were gritted, and its tongue was caught in the mixing blood into the foam and saliva. Slam! It made the glass crack a little more. Slam! The glass moved. It was barely held together now. Slam! Glass flew into my face and body as I closed my eyes and turned away. knew what was going to come next. I had seen enough monster pictures. This was about to be the end of my part of the movie. But then a miracle happened. The car started. As far as I can recall, the creature never actually reached into the car after breaking the window. I don't know if there wasn't time for it to, or what the reason, but it smashed the window. My father started the car, and we drove out of there into a hospital where I had all the glass pulled out of me and then had a talk with the hospital shrink. This ended our holiday, and the next day, after the hospital released me, we drove home. Our parents made me join them in rehearsing a lie about how our car was smashed with a rock by rowdy teenagers, so we came home. No monsters, no Dogman, no rabid upright walking canids, no post-traumatic stress disorder. The hospital had recommended that I see a shrink, but my parents felt that would embarrass the family and cause people to ask questions, so my PTSD went untreated for years, and I subconsciously found other ways to embarrass the family instead. It was not easy for me to tell you all this, so I hope you've been listening carefully. Dogman is a very real animal, but it's so much bigger and stronger and wilder than us that it may as well be supernatural. Don't kid yourself that this is just a creature of myth and legend. If you do, you'll end up traumatized like me. Now, you should expect the Dogman. You should prepare for the Dogman. And then, if you're really lucky, you'll never run into him. Don't go away. We've got 10 more scary Dogman stories starting right after this. I'd like to take a moment to say that if you have a scary story you'd like to tell us here, you can write Peter at peterbernard.com, or you can call our new Scary Stories hotline number and leave it to us in the form of a voicemail message. It's easy to remember. 804-LESCARY. That's 804-LESCARY, or 804-537-2279. Vicious Dogman versus Habituated Sasquatch, as told to Peter Bernard. Read by PQ Ribber. My wife and I own land on which a Bigfoot family has become habituated. We are the only family in the area who does not hunt, and so the Sasquatch are safe here and have all the deer and small game they want, so they no longer need to migrate and just stay here year-round. There are also other Squatch families passing through the area, usually in spring and autumn, but there are 2 young adult Bigfoot who live here year-round. Things are usually very peaceful around here, except for the time when a remarkably savage Dogman moved in and tried to take over the area as its own turf. Now, I don't blame you if you don't believe anything I just said. I wouldn't blame you if you thought all Bigfoot habituation people were either crazy or scam artists looking to make a buck. The reason you think that is that some Bigfoot habituation people really are genuinely crazy, and others really genuinely are just looking to make a buck. I won't name names. You can make up your own minds. A third reason that you might legitimately feel I'm just a nut is that, like a few other genuine Bigfoot habituation folks, I view myself as a protector of this possibly endangered species. So, I'm not going to tell you where I live. I'll narrow it down to say we're on the western edge of one of the southeastern states, but that's all I'm saying, because I don't want scientists or TV Bigfoot folk invading my woods. I respect these creatures, and I want them to live in peace. Since I'm not going to give you enough information to check out my story for yourselves, you have every right to doubt me. That having been said, everything I'm about to say is the absolute truth. Oh, I just remembered another reason that even I would think Bigfoot habituation people are Looney Tunes. We think we're receiving mental communications from the Sasquatch themselves. Yes, that's right. And I'll say it again. My wife and I both receive specific mental answers to our questions to Bigfoot, even though we both still to this day wonder how much of that is real and how much is our own imagination. For instance, we both call the male Abel, and neither of us know why we chose that name. We both feel like he told us that was his name. Similarly, we both call the female Keturah or Katara or Kathy. It took us some time to notice that these are both names from the Bible. Wasn't Esau the hairy one in the Bible? Yet we felt the Sasquatch was named Abel. Another odd thing is that when my wife bakes her special rhubarb pie, she always makes two and leaves the extra pie out in the trees outside our property up on the crook of this tree. She says they asked her to. They love the smell of baking rhubarb. I don't know if this is true of all Sasquatches, but ours love sweet things. They always leave us some odd object in return, as though they are paying for the pie. One time they left daisies, another time they left a little plastic ring, and they once left little white eggs that we hatched in an incubator. They turned out to be goldfinch eggs. We raised them and set them free. Now that I've convinced half of you that my wife and I are delusional in imagining things, I'm going to tell you a really crazy story, one that even we have a hard time believing. I'm going to tell you the story of the time I saw Abel the Sasquatch in a ferocious, nasty battle with what I can only assume was an actual Dogman. I've started listening to podcasts about Bigfoot and Dogman in recent times, and I have heard it said over and over that Dogman and Sasquatch don't appear in the same territory. I think that's probably generally true, but I know for a fact, since I saw it with my own eyes, that their turf does sometimes bang into each other, and they do sometimes clash. I think these battles are rare because they're so vicious, and that these few fights are actually how the boundary lines between Bigfoot and Dogman turf are decided. As I said, my land is prime hunting ground, but we don't hunt there, and we've done a pretty good job of keeping poachers off our land, so it's only natural that a predator like a Dogman would see the habituated Sasquatch here as a soft target and think that they could annex this territory without much effort at all. I strongly suspect the Dogman instigated this fight, trying to bully and frighten off the Squatches, not expecting them to fight back to protect their home. But fight back they did, or at least Abel, the male, certainly did. Now, as I say, I came on in the middle of this fight and only watched what I think was part of the middle of this battle. It was late summer, and we were hearing the strangest calls from the woods that I ever heard. It sounded like elk breeding brays, but as far as we know, there are no elk this far east. Also, I thought their mating season was later in the year, in autumn. The sounds grew stranger and closer, and it sounded like some sort of elk orgy was heading in our general direction. We talked about it in a bemused way, but that all changed when suddenly, with a huge crash, out of the bushes spilled two large creatures wrestling, apparently to the death. We had been sitting outside, enjoying the early evening, but this sudden chaos terrified us, and we ran inside to watch the action from our kitchen windows. It was Abel, or a Squatch his size, which at that point was between 6 and 7 feet tall, and he was battling what I at first thought was a large cat, and my wife thought was a skinny bear. They were literally tumbling over each other and knocking small trees over, so violent was the force of their thrusts at each other. They did not fight like men, even though both were essentially man-shaped. Then Abel let out a pained howl, and the two separated. His rival had bitten the Bigfoot on the shoulder, and he whimpered in pain. As I saw the two separated for the first time, we could make out that the creature battling our habituated Sasquatch was not a bear or a big cat or even another Squatch. It was some sort of Bigfoot-like monster with the head of a dog. While Abel whimpered and addressed his shoulder wound, the dog-headed monstrosity, which looked like it had 8 to 10 inches in height over the Squatch, but was much thinner, struck out at the ape-man, scratching it with its long, knife-like claws. My wife shouted and cried, and I had to hold her as she descended into tears. We thought we were about to see the Squatch she had baked rhubarb pies for get killed right in front of our eyes. Well, Abel, who had grown used to a peaceful life, finally got mad at the Dogman. After one painful swipe from the werewolf's claws, Abel let out a loud bellow, almost like a battle cry. I saw him use his incredibly long arms to clock the Dogman right in the jaw. Spit and blood flew as the Dogman was lifted off his feet and then down onto his back by the blow. That punch would have ended the life of any adult human. It's important to realize the unbelievable strength that Sasquatch possesses. The stunned Dogman got up, not on its hind legs, but on all four, and exited into the woods so quickly it was almost like he had dematerialized. It really was like he was shot from a gun. I've never seen an animal go from standing to running that quickly before or since. Abel also surprised us and chased after his adversary on all fours as well. We had hardly ever seen the Squatches walking on their hind legs before, but I can tell you from what I saw that day, they do drop to all fours when they need to go their fastest. Both massive creatures were soon out of our sight, back in the forest. Although we couldn't see them anymore, we heard the battle continue until long after sundown. There were cries of pain from both creatures, and my wife cried herself to sleep, terribly saddened by what was going on. We didn't see Abel again that year. In fact, we didn't see any Sasquatch at all that winter or the entire next year. We assumed the worst about our old friend. We also didn't see the Dogman again, though, so we never really knew what had happened. Then, and this is the reason I'm writing to you, just last week in February 2018, we saw them again. At least we think it was them, Abel and Keturah. I didn't recognize Abel at first because he had grown much taller, probably 12 feet tall, but Keturah looked the same, and she was carrying a young one with her. My wife thinks that's definitely Keturah, but isn't sure if the male is an older, taller Abel, or if this is a new mate. I suppose we could ask them and wait for a mental response, but once again, we really wouldn't know if we were imagining the response anyway. No matter what it may turn out actually happened, we both are very glad to have these creatures habituating on our property once again. It might sound counterintuitive to be happy about having a family of giant predators living on your land, but if you knew these giants will protect you from the Dogman, you'd be happy to see them, too. Bye for now. I gotta go help my wife bake some rhubarb pie.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
Dogman, Outside the Laundry Room, as told to Peter Bernard, read by P.Q. Ribber. Nothing is more annoying for a teenager than his parents making him do the laundry. But things can go from bad to worse if you look out the laundry room window and see a Dogman. This story happened back in the 70s when I was a teenager. I was camping with my family during the summer of either 1974 or 75, which, for us, meant parking our trailer alongside a bunch of other trailers in a campground we paid to get into. Not exactly getting away into nature, but there were other kids there from the other trailers, so when we went every year I was happy enough. I was a lonely, only child, and I loved every chance to get to hang out with other kids. By this time in the mid-70s, the campground was starting to get a little run down, and it was apparent the owners weren't doing anything to keep the place up. We didn't know it at the time, but by 1980 the land would be sold to a developer who would build an immense shopping center on the site. Maybe 7 or 8 of the trees were left out of what had once been a small forest, but the stores and parking lot were still surrounded with the larger forest, which stretches on further than the eye can see. But as I said, this story took place when it was still a campground, still isolated, and still a very natural area. My father felt that the point of us doing this camping was to take a break from things. But my mother felt it was a perfect opportunity for me to learn some responsibility. I was always trying to sneak off to play before she got around to assigning me endless chores designed to remove all fun from my life. This one day she caught me before I got away from her and gave me the family's laundry to do. I argued that I didn't want to do it, but lost. My father even took up my side and told Mom she was emasculating me, but he was overruled, and off I was, sent to do the laundry. Now, this was still before sunrise. I rose early when we were camping to get up before my mother did. It was dark out, and I was a bit surprised to find myself spooked to be walking to the laundry building in the dark like that. The one-room structure itself was on the outskirts of the park, set away from everything else, all alone, and by the tree line of the forest. I'd never been frightened there before, but somehow, in some way this time, I sensed something different. Maybe I should say that it felt like something was wrong. I walked to the laundry room, and I swear I could practically hear the horror movie music in my head. I could almost hear the audience in the theater yelling at me not to take a step further. I turned and looked at our trailer, trying to think of an excuse to go back there and wait the extra half hour till the sun was up and it wouldn't feel so creepy. I guess my fear of my mother was bigger than any fear for my life or well-being, so I took a deep breath and continued on my path to the laundry room. When I got there, I could see through one of the windows that it was dark inside. That made sense. Nobody but someone with my mother as their mother would be doing laundry before dawn. The only entrance and exit was the one I would be going through. If something or someone were hiding in the dark inside, there would be no back exit for them to escape through. If I caught something in there, its only means of egress would be through me. Conscious of this, I knocked 3 times on the door asking, "Anyone in there?" and listened. Nothing. I flung the door open and jumped sideways out of the way and waited. Nothing came out. No noise. No anything. I bravely reached in, fumbling around for the light switch. The old fluorescent bulbs noisily started up as loud as a bug zapper. Gazing around in the painfully harsh artificial light, I could see that the room was entirely empty other than 2 washers, 2 dryers, a folding table, some stools, a coin-operated soap dispensing machine, and some spiders in the corners. It was a huge relief to me. Now I could give up being terrified and go back to only being bored and put upon. I started doing the laundry in the way my mother had taught me, separating whites and colors and so forth. I was really nauseated to be handling the laundry of my parents, but my mother always said if she could wash my diapers when I was a baby, I could wash her shorts now. Even then, I knew there was very little logic in her argument, but I also knew I was living under her figurative roof for another few years, and I had no options but to deal with her eccentricities and the chores she assigned me. Now, back then, when I was doing laundry, I wouldn't bring a book. I would just sit there and stare at the laundry going in circles. It all seemed like a story to me. Each article of clothing seemed to have a personality, and I'd watch the drama play out as different articles would come to the front and the back, disappear in the soap suds, reassert themselves in the dry cycle. Washing the dryer was even more fun, no soap in the way. I sat down, watching the action in the machine, which was situated directly in front of a window looking out into the forest. I began noticing that it wasn't getting any lighter out, and we were already past the time when dawn should have happened. Curiously, I went to the front door and looked out at the sky. It was cloudy and seemed as though it was about to rain. Right, now it would be dark the entire time I was up there, and it wasn't going to get any less creepy. I silently prayed that someone would need to do laundry soon just so I wouldn't be alone. When I went back inside, I fiddled with the front door for a while to see if there was any way to lock it. I know the owners used to padlock it in the off-season, but not only did the door not lock, it didn't even close properly. If someone wanted to come into the laundry room while I was in there, they pretty much could do whatever they wanted. This door wasn't going to stop anything. I resumed my position on the stool in front of the machine and watched the laundry drama swirl in circles in front of me, not sure why I continued to feel so nervous. Then I saw it. Peripherally at first. There was a face in the woods and it was watching me. I looked up directly at the window and couldn't see it, but then I looked away and noticed it distinctly in my peripheral vision. It was a hairy face between the trees. Was it Bigfoot? I had seen The Legend of Boggy Creek and was a huge Bigfoot enthusiast. There's a scene in that movie where the Bigfoot reaches into a home and tries to grab a girl, so fear shot through me like I was stabbed with an icicle. If the creature wanted to reach through that window, or if he decided to come in through the unlockable door, I stared out through the glass. I squinted, trying my best to see this thing directly. Maybe it wasn't Bigfoot. Maybe it was a lunatic in the woods. That could be even worse. I needed to know what that was because I had no doubt there was something there. So I did what any really dumb character in a horror movie would do. I shouted through the window at whoever was in the woods to show themselves or go away. That's right. I thought I was being stalked by a predator that might or might not even be human, and I challenged it to show itself. Be careful what you ask for. Out of the woods stepped a hairy thing. It was not a man. It was not a Bigfoot either. It was like a monster dog, but it couldn't be a dog because it walked on its hind legs like a man. I didn't think of a werewolf at the time, but that's what it was, some kind of werewolf. It was giant, like a football player. Like, imagine if Jim Brown were covered in fur and had a fierce dog head. And wow, did he look pissed off at me. He charged the window so quickly I thought he was going to smash through it. I screamed like a little girl and ran all the way back to the trailer, crying. My parents at first laughed at me, then got angry as I refused to go up and put the clothes in the dryer. In fact, I refused to go out again for the rest of the day, even when my friends came and asked me to come out and play. I kept saying there was a dog-headed monster in the woods, and everybody just thought I was nuts. By the morning, Dad had already decided to go home. My mother made it clear how disappointed she was in me, and I still, to this day, feel guilty about us going home, as though I were the one who caused the Dogman appearance. When we went back the next year, I refused to do the laundry alone, only going with my mother to do it. I never saw Dogman or anything strange up there ever again. It was a few years later when I was in a theater and I saw the movie Wolfen. That is a lot like what the creature I saw looked like, the upright walking werewolves in that movie. I hadn't ever seen anything like that before, which is why I didn't think of werewolves when I saw the laundry room monster. To me, back then, a werewolf was a guy in a lumberjack shirt and a hairy face running around in old black and white movies with Abbott and Costello. This creature did not wear clothing. It looked like a beast of the forest, and a predator at that. Most of these woods are still intact these days, even though the park area itself is now covered in concrete and tar. I just have to assume those creatures, whatever they actually are, still wander those forests. I see Giorgio Tsoukalos on TV, asking if Anubis in ancient Egypt might have been a real creature, and I think to myself, maybe I should offer to take old Giorgio camping one time. I know just the place.
Beauty Pageant Dogman, as told to Peter Bernard, read by Madeline Starr. When I was younger, my mother was a beauty pageant mom. She would enter me in every beauty pageant she felt we could drive to in her 1976 Cadillac Sedan DeVille, which meant every pageant in the southeastern United States. She wanted me to become a star more than anything. Little did she know her obsession would lead us to coming face to face with a real-life werewolf. These days I work as a waitress, and I don't care what you think about that because it's honest work. I have no interest in show business, and if I ever have a daughter, I'd never push her to do anything she didn't want to do. But my mom had been forced into the beauty pageant world by her mom, and she loved it. I think my mother would have still been entering contests herself if they had them for women her age. She was trying to make me into her substitute. She kept telling me how much fun I was having, but I missed living in one place and having regular friends. I was so unhappy that I was at the point where I was practically missing school. Mom didn't care. Since she started getting Dad's alimony payments, she was a free agent who could do anything she wanted. And what she wanted was for me to win big in the beauty pageant game. This was the 1970s. The absolute low point in beauty pageant history. Women's liberation and feminism declared beauty pageants degrading exploitation of women. Less makeup and more masculine fashions ruled the day for girls and women. Not for me, though. I had to go around dressed like the 60s had never happened. I was personally into rock music and poetry and painting. I idolized Jim Morrison, the free spirit rock singer who viewed himself as a shaman. I felt like an idiot putting Vaseline on my teeth and taping various parts of my body together to live out some weird, delusional 1950s glamour fantasy of my mother. I wanted to be different from her. My entire generation wanted to be different from our parents. Instead, I was a clone of mine. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't have a problem with the return to glamour that's happened since then, but I was a kid of my time. Also, I want it clear that I don't disrespect beauty contestants. In those days, they were the closest thing to friends I had. Contrary to the stereotype, there were very few backstabbers in the shows in those days, and we usually pulled for each other. The stage mothers, though, that was an entirely different story, and my mother was a real barracuda. I suppose her behavior sometimes helped me in the short term, but she embarrassed me repeatedly in the long term. I wondered, what did she think would happen if I won some big pageant? Would the Red Sea part and angels sing? And then what would she do after she had caught her figurative white whale? To me back then, her obsession with winning something meaningless and shallow seemed like an illness, and she seemed like a sick woman. So I didn't win any big pageants, and even if you're willing to entirely uproot your lives as we had, there are still only so many beauty pageants to enter. After a while, you've entered them all, and then soon enough, you're getting to be too old to compete. I had felt I had reached that point, and I explained it to my mother. She wasn't hearing it. She kept booking me, but each contest now was cheaper or sleazier than the previous one. Finally, one freezing winter night, I found myself in a bathing suit on a tiny stage with 4 other desperate young women in a country music bar, located off some highway you could barely see on the Hagstrom map. Even with a packed crowd, it felt cold in there. Men pawed at my legs. I looked to my mother for help, but she just gestured at me to smile. Even though I was cranky all night, I won the prize, a big $75. I guess the other girls were even less excited to be there than I was. The MC gave it to me in cash from the door money. When my mother headed over to take her share of the winnings, I threw my overcoat on without getting dressed and exited the establishment for the car. My mother stormed up behind me, still pulling her coat on. I'm not sure what I thought I was doing. She had the car keys. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked loudly. "You know I have the car keys." So my mother and I got into a huge screaming match about the $75 there in the snowy parking lot of the seedy roadside bar. On one side, cars whizzed by, and on the other side, the dark forest loomed menacingly. None of that existed to us because we had reached an impasse. I told Mom I was keeping the $75 and starting a new life for myself. I just needed her to drop me off at some bus depot or train station. My mother screamed how I was killing her, how she couldn't survive without me, but that was all nonsense. She had her alimony. She wasn't going to starve, and she wouldn't miss the $75. If I could have walked to a bus station, I would have. As it was, I had no choice but to get a ride, and so I kept arguing with my mother. And then the outside world interfered in our little argument. I noticed a growling sound coming from the trees that weren't 30 feet away from us. My mother kept arguing in a panicked way, and I told her to shush. This only made her angrier. "Don't you tell me to shush," she bellowed. Then someone, or something, bellowed louder. Whatever it was, its shout was at an even higher decibel level than my mother, and it shut both of us up. Slowly, quietly, we both got into the Cadillac. We watched silently through the front windshield as the branches and leaves parted, and parted, and parted, until finally this remarkably tall, hideously frightening dog beast was standing there, staring at us like it hated us. It was not like a man dressed in a wolfman costume, and it looked nothing like movie monsters. It looked like if a giant bipedal dog had been working out at the gym and had gotten more muscular than Superman. Its ears stuck up in the air like an old Scotty Terrier, but there was nothing cute about this thing. Besides seeming huge, it also gave the distinct impression of being more agitated than someone trying to quit smoking. Like it was nervous or it had too much coffee. Its chest heaved and emptied, like it was out of breath. Its breathing capacity was so expansive that each time it breathed out, It felt and sounded like somebody let the air out of the Hindenburg. I told my mother to drive, and my mother said to me, "Don't you try to tell me what to do, young lady." Or she tried to say it. Because before she could finish her sentence, that dog thing was on the hood of the car with its face pressed hard to the windshield directly in front of my mother's face. The monster seemed to think it could push its head right through the glass, banging its face over and over into the glass. It looked like he might succeed, so I reached over and turned the key in the ignition. "Hit the gas, Mother," I suggested. My mom just sat there, glassy-eyed, looking at the monster drooling all over her front windshield and snarling. So I reached over and stomped on the gas pedal myself, stomping my mother's foot in the process and waking her from her shocked state. We pulled backwards out of the parking lot and directly into traffic. The Dogman charged after us, heading straight towards us. Cars were heading in our direction, probably doing about 60. There was no way they were going to be able to stop in time if we stayed where we were. It looked like my mom, the Dogman, and I were all about to get killed on the highway in a massive collision when my mom switched the car out of reverse and hit the pedal again. The Cadillac sped forward out of the highway, barely missing getting sideswiped, and slammed head first into the Dogman's belly and legs. The filthy creature was sent flying off back toward the trees, landing hard and bouncing on the gravel and dirt. The tires squealing and commotion had drawn a small crowd of bar customers and employees out to see what was going on. I screamed as my mother nearly ran 2 or 3 people over, spinning all over the place trying to get on the highway and get out of there, which we did. We drove for miles silently. But after things calmed down, I stuck to my guns and split off from my mother right then and there. And after the Dogman incident, she didn't even put up a fight about it. Somehow surviving Dogman can put your other problems into their proper perspective. It's one of those things that you would never wish on anyone, yet it's one of those things that made me stronger because I survived it. Although I sincerely hope I never meet Dogman again, I'm pretty sure that my life is better because I nearly got killed and eaten by the terrifying monster that we now call Dogman.
The upright, walking dog on the highway, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. This is a story that actually happened to me when I was being driven home one night by my ex-wife. She was still my wife back then. This was about 10 years ago. It was my birthday, so she'd agreed beforehand to be my designated driver. That having been said, I wasn't really that drunk, and the coldness of the late February night had helped sober me up a bit more. But we were both relaxed and in good moods when my wife stopped talking in mid-sentence, stared forward, slowed the car down, stopped, and turned off the engine. We had tall bushes to our right that must have been over 10 feet tall and extended for a long ways into the distance. On the left, the bushes stopped, and there was a little green hill and steps leading up to a small wooden house with a covered porch in front of it. There was an old lady, covered in blankets, rocking in her chair, looking right at me. She smiled and waved. I waved back, but didn't smile. My wife was staring directly in front of her, emotionless like a zombie. I almost said something, but that's when everything started. There was the sound of movement through the brush to our right. I could see the bushes swaying and then parting, all the way up out of my line of vision. I gasped so hard that I choked as I saw the feet, the legs, the torso, the long arms ending in claws, but not the head, of an immense, hairy, humanoid creature. The monster took one more step out of the bushes and onto the road in front of the car. I still couldn't see what it was, but I was not thinking Bigfoot. It was something even more disturbing than Bigfoot, and I screamed. I screamed like I did when I was a kid and a spider dropped into my food. I'm not proud of it, but I screamed like a coward. In my defense, none of this felt real. My wife was in a trance. We were parked in the dark in the middle of a highway, and this hairy demon-like thing walked out in front of us while an old lady smiled and watched. And the monster, I found it more frightening than a bear, than a Sasquatch, or anything I could have imagined, precisely because this was something I could never have imagined. Its legs were bent oddly, like the back legs of a deer or a goat. That's what made me think it was a demon or a devil. Also, this thing had a tail. I only caught glimpses of it, but it had a whiptail, long and thin, that looked like it would hurt to be hit by. And the most terrifying, the most surreal and nightmarish thing about the monster was its size. This was not 6 or 7 feet tall. This felt like a giant monster. It felt like the Hulk from more recent movies where he must be 12 or 16 feet tall. You probably have never seen a man-like creature that is that tall in real life. It's sort of a life-changing experience. It's a diaper-changing experience, at least. I still had not even seen this creature's head. It was too far up and out of my line of vision. I looked over at my wife. She stared blankly forward. I looked toward the old lady on the porch up the hill, and she smiled and waved back again. Then the monster leaned forward, placing its massive paws onto the car hood, and lowered its head into my field of vision. It was a dog. It was an upright, walking dog. It didn't look like a werewolf. It looked like a dog, except it walked on its hind legs. Imagine the largest, blackest dog you'd ever seen. Now, imagine it rearing back and standing up on its back legs. Now, imagine that its 2 front paws spread out, left and right, coming to the sides like human arms. Imagine them bulkier and more muscular than any dog's arms have ever been. Imagine a huge black dog, bigger than a bear, with a chest of a steroid freak bodybuilder from prehistoric times. The paws, or really claws, were so large that they essentially had become hands. It looked like it could pick up a basketball in one of its paws, but it might deflate the ball with those dagger-like, Wolverine-like claws. The monster head had an extra long snout like a Russian wolfhound, but black and with the teeth of an alligator or a tyrannosaur. Its eyes glowed hot, and I swear that in the cold I saw steam coming not just from the creature's nostrils, but also from its red, lit from within eyes. That was what was now staring at my wife, and she was staring back at this thing. The giant Dogman didn't hang its tongue out of its mouth and didn't pant. It seemed to want to breathe through its nose, and it seemed to conserve all movement to only the most necessary. This was not man's best friend, nor was this a savage wolf or coyote. This was some sort of intelligent being, and it seemed to have complete mental control over my wife. Panicking, I looked at the old lady in the distance and signaled for her to call the police. She smiled and waved back. I remembered that I had my Motorola L7 telephone and took it out. I probably should have tried to take a photo with it, but my first thought was to call the police. I saw that I had like 1 bar of reception, but I was about to make the call anyway when the monster slammed its paws on the car hood, causing me to jump in my seat and drop my phone. Then this thing, in a split second, smashed its face into the front windshield directly in front of me, and it screamed. Or barked, or brayed, or scared. scared the living daylights out of me is what it did. I was certain my life was over. Rather than being grateful that I'd gotten to celebrate my birthday before dying, I whined like a little brat that I was too young to go and that this was unfair. Of course it was unfair, but it's not life's job to be fair. Apparently, it's life's job to get up in your face and scream. So there we were, my wife in a hypnotized trance, and me in a near catatonic state from abject fear. You can laugh at me all you want, but if you find yourself in an impossible situation against an unbeatable, possibly demonic foe, then we'll see how brave you are. The Dogman went back to his former position, leaning over and staring into my wife's eyes. She continued to stare blankly back. I'm not even sure if she was blinking. I heard a strange guttural sound coming from somewhere outside the car to the left. Looking around nervously, I saw it was the old lady. She had fallen asleep and was snoring loudly. This was an insane universe. Was I asleep too, like the old lady, and dreaming this? We sat there for a half hour, according to the clock on the dashboard. If it were a dream, would time have passed in that way? No other cars drove by in either direction during the entire episode. Then, just like that, the Dogman stood up and began walking slowly toward the old lady and the house. My wife, still in a trance, turned the car's ignition and drove us quickly away from there. I strained my neck and turned in my seat to see what the upright walking dog was doing, but we were around a turn very quickly, and I no longer could make out what was going on back there. Was he going to menace that old lady? Did the old lady somehow already know the Dogman? What exactly happened to me? My wife started talking again in mid-sentence, exactly from where she had left off half hour earlier. She seemed normal again. I certainly wasn't. When I told her what happened, she grew cross with me and accused me of making up stories to gaslight her. It led to an argument, the first of many to come after this event. I wanted to know what had happened when the Dogman was staring into her eyes. Was he reading her mind? Was he implanting thoughts or even commands in her mind? I watched her like a hawk and carefully considered every single thing she said and did from then on. I couldn't find anything about her that seemed different than from before the incident, but I had lost my sense of trust in her, and she grew resentful of my newfound fear of closeness. I guess you could say Dogman broke up my marriage, but maybe it was just fate. My current wife doesn't believe in monsters. She laughs at stories of Dogman, saying they're just urban legends and campfire tales. I never argue with her, and I make sure we never drive through the woods. Do you want to meet a real werewolf? It's told to Peter Bernard. Read by PQ River. So it was in the mid-1980s, and I was at some kind of pop culture convention in New Jersey. I want to say Jersey City, but don't quote me on that. I was there with my younger brother, who was a total werewolf nut. We weren't kids, but we were still young, and we shared an apartment together on the outskirts of Hoboken. This was before the internet, so if you wanted to find stuff about werewolves or anything weird, you really had to invest time and money into it. So, my brother was interested in buying copies of comic books with werewolves in them, old Mexican Wolfman movies, and any famous Monsters of Filmland issues with anything about Lon Chaney Jr. At one of the video tables, a guy asked my brother if he liked werewolves in this weird way. He was looking back and forth, acting suspicious and guilty. My brother, of course, said yes, he liked werewolves. So the guy leaned in and whispered, "Do you want to see a real werewolf?" Now, I thought the guy was pulling some kind of scam, but my brother was totally hooked in. Yes, of course he wanted to see a real werewolf. The guy reached under the table and pulled out a plastic VHS box with a Xerox handmade cover on it that said, "Real Werewolf," and what was probably meant to be scary hand lettering. The guy asked $20 for it. My brother was reaching in his pocket before he finished his pitch. I stopped him and demanded we get to see some of the video ourselves before any money exchanged hands. So the guy takes whatever movie was playing out of the videotape machine and puts this one in. It starts to play with no titles, and it's very dark and grainy, and I can see a figure in the darkness. We watched it for 2 or 3 minutes, squinting, and I wasn't sure what I was looking at. My brother was satisfied that it was possibly a wolf man, so he bought the tape. "You want to meet the guy who made this tape? He says he sees these things around his house all the time." For an additional $5, the weird guy sold my brother the supposed phone number and address of the supposed filmmaker of the supposed video of the supposed werewolf. Okay, fast forward, and we're driving deep into the heart of Jersey in a borrowed car to go ring the bell of a total stranger to ask him about monsters. I felt really stupid, but my brother had called ahead and said the guy sounded happy to have us out. So eventually we got to the place, and it was seriously in the middle of nowhere. It was a bit run down, but a nice-looking house, 3 stories tall. Everything was extremely quiet there. We rang the doorbell and waited. She was a new wave kind of girl, wearing a 60s style green mini dress and white go-go boots with severe dyed blue hair and makeup. This was my type back then, and I stuttered when I was talking to her. She told us the guy we were there to see was inside, and she let us in. The rooms were large and completely empty inside. Everything echoed. All the way to the back of the building and up the stairs we went, with her loud trash and vaudeville shoes leading the way. Eventually, we reached a room and went inside to find the only furnishings so far in the entire house. This room had shag carpeting and huge speakers connected to a vinyl turntable. There was a skinny guy with long, stringy, brown, greasy hair laying on a couch, reading a music magazine and smoking a Marlboro. He sat up when we came in and looked us over, unsmiling. I noticed his black T-shirt had a picture of Run DMC on it. My brother excitedly told the guy what a fan he was of the dude's Wolfman video, and T-shirt man grunted in response. The girl asked if we brought money with us because they had werewolf photos to sell. My brother said yes, and the two of them negotiated for a while as the T-shirt guy and I watched. I couldn't help but watch. That girl was too cute. When it seemed she had gotten all he wanted to spend, Mr. T-shirt interrupted. "You want to meet a real werewolf?" he asked in a raspy voice, then hacked out a smoker's cough. He sounded 97 years old, but had to have been under 25 by the looks of him. My brother was already begging him to lead us to the monster. "It's in the forest," the guy warned my brother. I was fine. "We have to wait until it gets a bit darker," the guy added. My brother didn't care. This was a real-life werewolf we were talking about. The guy said to wait, that he had to go in the other room and make a phone call. After he left, I whispered to my brother, asking him why a guy would need to make a phone call before showing us a werewolf. Was he calling the werewolf? I didn't even believe this house had a phone in it. My suspicions were confirmed when I heard the door open and close downstairs. Looking through the window, we saw the guy walk off into the forest. "Is there a phone in the forest?" I asked my brother, but he still didn't want to leave. The girl came back in the room, asking if we wanted anything to drink since we were going to be there for a while. We didn't, But I decided to chat this girl up. As I've said before, she was really my type physically, and my affection for her was genuine. She seemed sort of surprised that I was making it clear how much I liked her, yet I wasn't hitting on her in any way. I think she was used to getting hit on by guys, not being listened to. I, on the other hand, wanted to know every single thing about her. She was slow to open up, but after 5 or 10 minutes, she was laughing and telling me stories about the cat she used to live with. As deliberately artificial as her makeup was, that's how genuinely warm her heart was underneath all that. At least that's how I felt about her in that naive moment in time. The t-shirt guy came back in the room and announced it was time for us to go meet the werewolf, but that he had to use the facilities before departing. As soon as he exited the room, the girl, looking guilty, told us quietly that we'd better leave right away. I was confused and asked her what was going on. My brother wasn't even paying attention to her. He was lost in fantasy werewolf land. She explained to me that the video was a fake and this was a scam. That they were going to lead us into the woods where a bunch of t-shirt guys' friends were going to roll us. They were going to take everything we had, including the car keys to our borrowed car. By tomorrow, there would be nobody and nothing left in this house for the police to come arrest. It took a bit of convincing to get my brother to accept this harsh new reality and to get him heading downstairs with me to make our escape. The girl refused to come with us and also declined my request to get her phone number. She told me I better just forget I ever met her. That wouldn't be easy. To this day, I haven't forgotten her. By the time my brother and I got down to the ground floor, we could hear T-shirt guy coming back from the bathroom. He was going to walk in between us and the front door. There must be a back door, I said, and grabbed my brother running to the back of the house. I heard T-shirt guy scream something, and we ran faster. Outside, it was late dusk, and it was already getting hard to see. We ran around the house to the front where the car was parked, only to be met there by T-shirt guy plus 2 other young men we hadn't seen before. We ran into the woods and they chased us. It wasn't long before we were caught, exhausted. The 3 guys loomed over us as we sat on the ground trying to catch our breath. They began telling us the terrible things they were going to do to us because we had made them have to run. My brother was crying. I wasn't too happy myself. One of the guys had some kind of bat or paddle or something. This wasn't going to be fun. But then, the literally strangest thing that will ever happen in history as far as I'm concerned actually happened. We heard a growl. We heard a bellow. The 3 guys fell to the floor next to us, stunned. Behind them, we saw it. It was a huge, man-shaped wolf. It was a werewolf. A gray-haired, pointy-eared, long-fanged, entirely fur-covered wolf-man monster. The 3 guys ran off, and the werewolf ran after them. My brother and I stared at each other in shocked silence for a while. He croaked out a whisper. That was a werewolf, he said to me. Then he thought about it for a while, and suddenly his eyes lit up brightly. That was a werewolf, he repeated much more loudly. He bounced quickly to his feet and would have gone running after the monster if I hadn't grabbed him by the arm. Fortunately, I am the bigger brother, and I won the struggle. We returned to the borrowed car, I started it up, and we practically flew out of that part of the planet, never to return. I'm very glad this all occurred in the days before TV shows like Finding Bigfoot, because I think my brother would have wanted to go on an expedition to see that monster again. It wasn't really a thing to do that kind of stuff back then, and I don't think it ever occurred to him. I know there's There's no way I could have ever joined him. In my opinion, seeing a werewolf once in your life is seeing a werewolf one time too many. Dogman versus Bodybuilder. As told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. I'm a fitness model and bodybuilder, and this is a true story from my life. However, this is a story about when I was younger and I was a complete jerk. I don't want anybody to think badly about fitness models because of this story. Even I'm not as stupid as this anymore, but this story happened years and years ago when I was a noob back around 2013 or 2014. Back then I was so arrogant. I thought I could take on a Dogman. It was a mistake to think that. A mistake that nearly cost me my career and my life. Let me start from the beginning. Okay, you know the rumors that bodybuilders and athletes sometimes do certain things to give themselves bigger muscles, and you know the rumors that doing these things can sometimes put the athlete in question on edge, make them touchier, maybe cause them to jump from normal to rage in less than 60 seconds. Well, sometimes these rumors are true. So now, here I was, an out-of-control ego, an out-of-control body, and an out-of-control temper. Nice combination, right, folks? I'm pretty successful now that I've cleaned up my act and I live my life more respectfully of those around me. But back then, I wore more expensive clothes than I do now. I lived in a fancier place, and I drove a ridiculous sports car whose brand name shall not be mentioned, since everyone would know who I am then. How did I do it? Simple. I just lived beyond my means. So, I had a buddy from back when I was a normal person in high school who would come out to visit me sometimes, and this story starts on one of those days. We were cruising down the highway together, just gabbing, enjoying some tunes, living the life. We started talking about ex-girlfriends, and there was this one chick we both really digged, but never asked out. Let's call her Alice, because when you looked at her, you were in Wonderland. So my bro tells me he's Facebook friends with her, and she's hotter than ever. Plus, she just got divorced. Kids? I asked. Would I even be talking about her if she had kids? He answered. See, now that is a true friend. So, he starts writing her for me online, and before I know it, she's on Skype, eyeing my body as I'm driving from my bro's phone. Needless to say, she gives us her address, and I'm off the highway practically before the exit is there, so I can get over to her new hometown. My GPS in those days was garbage, so we got a little lost on these back roads that claimed were getting us closer to this beautiful girl. We were seeing houses, and we were seeing fewer houses. Then we saw an abandoned factory. Then we saw trees. Lots of trees on either side. Nothing but trees as far as we could see in front of us, too. I was starting to fall asleep, but then the road seemed to narrow, and it started curving. Left and right, and left and right, sharper turns each time. We were lucky to see 200 feet in front of us before the next sharp turn. Anybody else would have slowed down. I, however, was not anybody else. Hey bro, I asked, how fast do you think I could take this baby through these curves without crashing? He thought about it for a while, then opened his mouth to answer. Then he closed it again and thought some more. Really fast, I bet, he finally calculated. No, give me a number, I asked. 70, 80, 100? He was thinking again. Finally he answered, yeah, man, definitely. Well, which one, I asked. All of them? He said yeah, so I shrugged my shoulders and floored the gas. We really only were beginning to accelerate, so we weren't going all that fast yet, and this rabbit ran out on the road in front of us. That's right, a little bunny rabbit. My friend gasped and screamed like a little girl. A rabbit! A rabbit! Don't hit the rabbit! The heck with that. We had a bet going here. I floored it and headed for the little bunny. Go ahead, boo me, I don't care. Doesn't matter anyway, because I didn't hit the rabbit. How did that happen? Well, I'll tell you. In the next maybe 1 second, maybe 2 seconds, about a minute of things happened in front of my eyes. A creature flew out of the woods on our right and grabbed the rabbit. This was not a small woodland creature. This was a huge, bear-sized thing. But it was a fast-moving, huge, bear-sized thing. It was in front of my car before I could even think, and it had the rabbit in its hands. Wait, its hands? Yes, this bear-sized, fur-covered, fast-moving, two-legged thing had the rabbit in its hands. Not for long, though. In the next instant, car-struck monster and the rabbit flew out of its hands, landing somewhere outside of my view. Let's say he landed in Knott's Berry Farm, so you can all relax about the stupid bunny. The monster flew to my left, and my car's rear spun to the right, sending us into a spin. We finally crashed sideways into a tree, with my right back taking a beating. Assessing the damage, it looked like my engine and wheels were intact. I could probably still drive the thing. But that's not what mattered to me that day. What mattered to me was that someone, anyone, had dared to interrupt my drive. Someone, anyone, who got in my way in those days paid the price. I screamed. I screamed a battle cry worthy of the ancient Vikings. I got the monster in my sights. It was slumped on the ground, breathing heavily. Maybe it was dying. I decided to help it along. Getting out of the car and slamming the door behind me, I stormed over to the mass of fur and blood laying alongside the road. Cursing and shouting, I told it to get up so I could knock it right back down. I don't know if it understood me, but it complied with my request. Up and up and up rose this thing, whatever it was. I couldn't see its face as it was turned away from me, but then it turned round and looked at me, fury in its eyes and slime dripping from its mouth and nose. I screamed. I heard my buddy scream behind me. This monster had a dog head. It had a dog head but a man's body. Well, a man mixed with a bear. It looked insane. Even I was shut up by this thing when it roared. For the first time in my life, I didn't know what to do. I just stood there, unable to believe what I was looking at. The Dogman had no problem understanding what it was looking at, though. It took one swipe at me, cutting me and throwing my body backward, where I landed painfully on the tar. I got up immediately in my mind, then noticed that my body hadn't responded. Laying there on the ground, looking up, spots began buzzing around the edges of my field of vision, and I saw the Dogman walk directly over me, looking down. I said goodbye to this world, and everything went black. And then I woke up in a hospital. Fortunately for me, it took me a few days to remember all this stuff I just told you. My buddy rescued me by driving the car directly at the Dogman and chasing it off, then calling for an ambulance. I told you, this guy is a true bro. So I learned a bunch of lessons while convalescing for the next 3 months. I learned a lot of humility, for one thing. I learned respect for the rest of the world, and I learned that no matter how badass you are, nobody, but nobody, is as badass as a Dogman. Dogman Cave. as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ River. I just celebrated my 70th birthday last week, but when I was a boy in the early 1960s, I encountered what I consider absolute proof that the Dogman everyone is now talking about is actually a creature from the inner earth. Please allow me to explain. For reasons I will not get into here, neither of my parents were able to raise me and my younger brother Roy. We got bumped around from foster home to child welfare facility until our Uncle Reynard agreed to take us in. Now, Reynard was a confirmed bachelor, and he did not raise us in a typical way. He regarded us as his little brothers and expected us to behave like adults. We had to get ourselves awake in the morning and get ourselves to school on time. We had to make our own meals, clean our own rooms. When the child welfare people came, it was our job to make sure he came off looking like a good parent. We knew that, with all his eccentricities, we were a lot better off with Uncle Reynard than any place else the state was likely to place us. One of the weird things about our uncle was that he was an early UFO nut. He read and saved and cataloged every spooky or science fiction publication he could find. His library had very few hardbound books, but a whole lot of tiny digest-sized magazines. He lived outside of a place that I swear to you is called Pig, Kentucky. Yeah, Pig. It was far from the worst place we had lived. In fact, my brother and I really loved it there in Pig. It was a short trot to Cedar Spring Valley and the Cedar Sink Trailhead. We had plenty of nature and walking distance, and those were fairly wonderful times for us. I remember school and making some friends there, but I mostly remember my brother and me exploring nature like we were Lewis and Clark or some other great Americans from the past. We never knew what was around the next corner, but we knew it was going to be exciting, and we knew our Uncle Reynard would listen in rapt attention as we related our daily adventures to him over our raviolio dinner. One day, we had a tall tale to tell him that was just so tall that he knew it had to be real. We had both run home crying, so he knew we were definitely not lying about what had happened to us. And what happened was this. We found Dogman's home. Now, I should note that back then Dogman was not yet a thing. Nobody used that term, and nobody thought werewolves were real either. There was absolutely no talk about dog-headed people or upright walking dogs or anything even vaguely related to that yet. So when we told our uncle about what had happened to us, we never used the term Dogman, and in fact we never referenced dogs or wolves at all when describing what we had seen. That's because we thought it was a creature that Uncle Reynard had told us about, a monster from one of his old magazines, a creature that lived underground in the hollow earth, a psychic vampire that could fire invisible rays at you and draw your energies from you, a diabolical monster that could exert control over your mind itself, even from great distances and from underground. Uncle had always told us that this creature had a very long nose. When we saw the long snout of the Dogman, we knew, or thought we knew, that we were in the presence of a Diro. The Diro, or detrimental robots, were characters and stories that Uncle told us were true, written by Richard Shaver and Ray Palmer back in the 1940s. We hadn't taken the tale seriously until this one day we were in the park longer than usual, and it was getting late. By the time we were walking home, it was getting a bit dark. We had been getting bullied by by bigger kids earlier in the day, so when we heard something moving in the bushes to our left, we ducked down quietly and let them pass. But what walked past us was not a kid, or even a bunch of kids. It was a 7 or 8 foot tall, hairy, two-legged monster. My brother and I both gasped, and the creature spotted us at once. We stood up in terror, intent on running away like fools. The animal, which had to be twice our height, screamed at us in this half-dog, half-human voice that was so loud it felt like we'd been punched hard all over our bodies. Rather than run, we went into some kind of shock and fell to our knees, weeping. The long-snouted, hairy demon turned and ran into a bush, then seemed to just not be there anymore. That's when we ran home, crying like infants. After relating our story to Uncle Reynard through our terrified sobbing, he told us there must be a cave entrance behind or under that bush. The next morning he made us bring him back to the spot of the incident so that we could show him the location. I don't suppose I have to even tell you it took us all some time to get up the nerve to go look at that bush the dog creature had run into. When we did, our bravery was rewarded. There was a crevice under the bush. It was an entrance to some kind of cave. The hole was large enough for us to stick our heads inside, but in no way should it have been large enough for the Dogman to duck in there. We gathered stones and tossed them into the opening, listening to see how deep it was. We couldn't really tell, but Kentucky has so many caves under it, including Mammoth Cave, that it's even possible that all the cave systems down there connect. If there were any place that an underground civilization could exist, it would be under Kentucky. We gathered larger stones to block up the entrance to the cave, which we would call Deero Cave for the rest of my uncle's life. When Uncle Reynard died last year, my brother and I had reason to go out to his old place to wrap up some of his final business. We had some extra time, so we wandered out to the area in which we had seen the Deero or Dogman back when we were young. Surprisingly, most of the landmarks remained intact, and we found the place as though we had just been there the day before. Looking under the bush, we found the entrance was open again. All our blocking stones had been removed. In fact, there were no signs of the stones at all. The place must have been reopened years ago. By now the hole had been enlarged and was big enough for a grown man to climb in there. Of course, my brother and I are too old for such adventures anymore. There were all kinds of tracks leading into and out of that crevice. Some small tracks, some large tracks. It looked like the hole was used regularly and often by a variety of something. I haven't lived in Kentucky for years, even though I spent the best years of my life there. I miss a great many things about the bluegrass state, but one thing I will never miss are the demonic creatures that live under that beautiful place. I will never miss the Kentucky Dogman. The Grinning Dogman. As told to Peter Bernard. Read by PQ River. I have a strange tale to tell you. Maybe the strangest tale of all. I hope you believe me. I'm not sure I believe myself. It's about me being haunted, or rather my property being haunted, by the oddest and most frightening dogman that I've ever heard of. I don't think this is a natural creature, and sometimes I wonder if it might even be some kind of holographic projection, or maybe an advanced robotic device. I simply cannot explain the things that have been happening, and so I'm turning to you and your audience for advice. When the story began, I was in my late 60s and retired, living in the house my late wife wanted us to grow old in together. She didn't make it, so I'd been trying to grow old for both of us. It's a lovely home and the grounds are beautiful. There is a large yard that costs a lot of money to hire the neighbor's kid to mow, and beyond that is the forest. I'm not going to tell you which forest, but if you walk about 1.5 miles into my forest, you'll find yourself crossing over into national parkland and a very famous forest. It really was the ideal place for us to retire to, but by those days it seemed pretty lonely for me. For a long list of reasons, it felt a safer financial decision for me to stay put there for the remainder of however long the good Lord wants me here on His earth. In the past year, things have become strange there, though. It started after those kids in the Walmart parking lot made fun of me, calling me terrible things just because I had a bumper sticker supporting a political candidate they don't approve of. They started following me around in the store, threatening to kill my cat. I don't have a cat. I alerted security, but the security guard also dislikes the politician I support, so he basically told the kids to do their worst against me. Our society has broken down into savagely feuding rival gangs. So when I saw the grinning monster leering at me from the woods, I just assumed it was those kids again. I thought about calling the local police, but I thought maybe they would dislike my political candidate and therefore feel I should be tormented and harassed like the security at the store felt. That I no longer had rights because I voted for a different party than they voted for. So I did nothing. The next day, I found him again, standing there in the forest, but in a new place now. He just stood there grinning. It was a ridiculous smile. It looked like a mask. It just stood perfectly still, smiling toward my house, partially hidden by the bushes. I thought about digging out my father's old hunting rifle from the attic, but shooting a dumb kid wasn't going to make the situation any better. So he watched me, and I watched back. And then one day, I saw the creature turn its head. This was the first movement I had seen from it. At least I knew it wasn't a scarecrow now, so I watched. And he turned his head to my right and kept turning his head to my right until it went completely in a circle and he was staring directly toward me again, grinning, wide-eyed like a lunatic. That night, there were lights over the forest. I thought it was a helicopter or a few of them because the lights were very bright. I got out of bed to watch them, hoping that they were the authorities and that they had shown up to get that monster thing out of my forest. Instead, they shone their light in my face and lit up my room blindingly bright. I noticed the helicopters made no sound whatsoever. I don't remember them turning off or flying away. I just remember waking up in bed the next morning, wondering if I had dreamed the entire episode, but I knew I hadn't. I sort of became paranoid after that. I got my food delivered because I was having nightmares that the security guy at Walmart was stalking me. The doorbell rang that night, terrifying me. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I went to the door, nobody was there. I went to my back window and looked into the forest. There it was. Even at night, it stood there, grinning at me, leering at me. Some kind of monster in the forest. In the dark, its eyes glowed a sort of ambery color, and it really looked like a space alien or demon or robot or something. Animal eyes don't glow. They don't emit light. This creature, Its eyes glowed. At the end of my rope, I grabbed a flashlight and a baseball bat and headed out barefoot and in my pajamas to the forest to have it out with this monster kid once and for all. As I began to draw closer, I could hear the strangest sound. It was almost like laughter, but not exactly. I marched into the forest, no longer seeing the monster there and not sure if I was heading in the correct direction. And then, with no warning, there it was in all its glory. The grinning demon stood before me, and it was most definitely not a kid in a monster mask. This thing was some kind of standing dog, but more muscular. Those were not human legs. In fact, no human could contort his legs to fit into a costume that looked like that. It was not a human, of that I am certain. Its hair, or fur, was messed up, filthy, and matted. The face was insane. But it wasn't a monster or Sasquatch face. Up close, I could see it was a wolf or coyote head, but dark and deranged. Its eyes looked wrong. I had never and still have never seen any sort of thing with eyes like that before. I dropped my baseball bat and flashlight and expected to die right then and there. Nothing happened, so I bent down and picked up the flashlight only to find that the creature was gone. After that, a terrible string of animal disappearances occurred in the area, and I was glad I had no pets myself. I had my suspicions as to the culprit, obviously. It all reached a head one night when the creature appeared at my living room window while I watched television. Imagine looking at the window and seeing a dog standing on its hind legs, an insane look in its eyes, and a huge ear-to-ear grin on its face. Could you even imagine that? Well, I saw it, so I ran to the kitchen where I saw it again. I ran up the stairs to my bedroom, and I swear I could hear the sound of the thing crawling up the back wall of the house. I could hear its nails sliding across the aluminum siding like fingernails on a chalkboard, and I was reduced to tears by the stress of the situation. I closed the bedroom windows, but I knew it could get in when it reached the second floor. I knew the Dogman was going to get in, and I knew my days on Earth were finally over. I called my daughter on the phone to make some final arrangements, and she called an ambulance for me. Now I'm living in the retirement community that my daughter and her husband chose for me. They think I've lost my mind, so they make me talk to weird doctors who ask strange questions, and they keep me too drugged up to complain. But the thing is, this retirement community, it's located to a forest, you see, a very famous forest that you would have heard of. And there's a Dogman in that forest. He comes to the backyard of the retirement home at night when everyone else is asleep. He climbs the wall to the second story of the building, and he stares at me all night. And he won't stop grinning at me. He won't stop grinning at me. Don't go away. Madeline Starr has another Dogman story right after this.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
City girl meets country dog man. As told to Peter Bernard. Read by Madeline Starr. When I first moved out of the city to my own house, I didn't realize how much of a lifestyle change it would be to have to drive for 3 hours every day. But as much as I complained about having to be in the car, I learned the hard way that it's better than walking. And that's a lesson that was taught to me by Dogman. I'm a hardworking executive in a Fortune 500 company, and even though my daddy got me my first job, I still got fired from it and had to start over, competing against my own family's company. I bought them and put them out of business before I was 27. I can say with confidence that everything I have, I earned on my own. Yet I know that won't stop the haters out there from being jealous of me or acting in a spiteful way toward me. We all do what we have to in order to survive. It's just that the way I survive is by being the best in the world. At least, that's how I survived before I met my guy, Danny. He showed me that there actually is a point to relaxation, and there actually is a function for empathy and even love. Danny is the only reason I got the house in the first place. Before him, I thought moving out of town meant moving to Brooklyn. He's an artist. He works at home, and he reached a point where he felt the city had stopped inspiring his art. He was going to move to the country anyway, one way or the other, even if he had to take some place that was really cheap and eat ramen noodles for a year. Buying that house for Danny and myself was really the first time I ever thought about someone else and placed their needs before my own. That is the thing about Danny that terrifies me. He makes me do things that have no profit incentive. I end up doing things just because I hope I can make him happy. How bizarre is that? Obviously, I'm seeing a shrink about it, but we're still going through my childhood and all that. We're not even up to Danny yet. I'm beginning to doubt that even an expensive psychiatrist can help me figure out how to get away from him. He does nothing but cost me money and waste my time with non-work-related activities. If I had met him when I was younger, I might never have become the cutthroat millionaire genius that I am today. So I know I could afford a driver, but as I've tried to make clear, I prefer to do as many things by myself as possible. I took a cab to work every day when I was in the city, and now I would drive myself. I became a fan of audiobooks because they would distract me from the fact that the traffic wasn't moving. In the city, I would move from my safe space at home onto the dangerous streets, but then quickly into a means of conveyance, and then back in a super clean, safe space at work. I barely had a chance to get dirty unless it rained or something. In that sense, very little had changed for me. I would get dressed for work, go into my safe space in my car, drive in comfort listening to whatever might amuse me, and then park in the company garage already inside the building. I remember one time I was stuck in traffic and I was watching some guys working to fix something on the side of the road. They were filthy. It was a hot day. They were laboring hard with their hands in the dirt. And they were a mess. Me? I was sitting in air-conditioned splendor listening to a violin concerto in surround sound, just a few feet away from them. I found I couldn't escape this newfound concept. How different life could be if you were just a few inches away, on the other side of a door. I resolved to try my best to stay on the nicer side of the door. After all, I'd spent my entire life there. And so it went until one night I was driving home after dark. There was so much going on at work that I was lucky to get to leave it all. The late nights were much harder now, having to drive over an hour to get home. I contemplated getting my own place in the city, but every time I started to talk to Danny about it, I chickened out. I was afraid he might take it the wrong way and think I would use it to have an affair or something. In actuality, I would just use it to get a little extra sleep. But I was not secure enough in my relationship, so there I was driving home in the dark. The first thing that made this night different from any other was that I found myself watching these odd, brightly colored lights in the sky. I don't know what they were. At first I thought it was a plane, then maybe a helicopter. They didn't have any blinking lights, though. I think all aircraft are supposed to have blinking lights for one reason or another. This one had red, blue, yellow, and white lights that would flash in a repeating pattern, sometimes making slight differences in the pattern. I was almost tempted to pull off the side of the road to watch them, but that would mean leaving my clean, environmentally controlled, safe space and venturing out onto the side of a dark highway in the middle of nowhere with my French designer dress and Louboutin heels. I laughed at the idea. Imagine! Why would I ever do that? This was something that would never, ever, ever happen. And then suddenly, my car engine turned off, and we rolled to a full stop in the middle of the highway. Now, as you can imagine, this was my top-of-the-line Lexus, barely more than a year old, and it just died on me in the middle of the road? So I did what any logical person would do. I threw a temper tantrum, screaming every nasty word I could think of at this overpriced deadweight. I had forgotten completely about the colored lights in the sky. I don't even remember if they were still around or not. I got out of the car and looked around. Recognizing some landmarks, I realized I was nearly home and just had to walk through a small patch of trees to take a shortcut to the house. It was bright that night, either because of the moon or maybe those lights were still overhead. I was in too foul a mood to look up, though. I had to watch my every step through the forest or I would twist my ankle in my power heels, and that was not going to happen. So step by tiny, careful step, I began my trek into the wilderness. This was the first time I had been out of my comfort zone since the first time Danny asked me on a date. And this wasn't half as fun as that. I was completely absorbed in my troubles and feeling sorry for myself when I heard someone snoring. Snoring? In the middle of the forest? I stopped and listened. And listened. Then finally I heard it again. It wasn't snoring, exactly. It was heavy breathing. It sounded like it was coming from a man, and a very, very big one, too. These were not fun facts to realize. Before taking another step, I decided I'd better be certain which was the shortest way home and then get going, which is what I did. The only problem was that I heard that heavy breathing again, and it was coming from directly in front of me, directly between me and home. I saw Danny in my mind. Would I ever see him with my eyes again? I felt so sad I wanted to cry. Was this going to be the end for me? Would it be quick? Somehow I figured probably not. Illogically, I ran directly toward the sound of the breathing, screaming, bloody murder. Then it stood up and I could see what was making the labored breathing. It was the most terrifying sight I had ever witnessed. It was a man, covered in hair, but his head was not the head of a man. It was the head of some sort of dog or wolf or demon. This was a living abomination. If I had been religious, I think that thing would have made me doubt the existence of good in the world. I was a businesswoman, though, so I recognized this thing for what it was. Pure evil. This thing was so evil it could have headed up any corporation. It was so vile, it could have been a high-powered player in Washington or Silicon Valley. It was so innately wrong that it could have been one of those politicians that takes bribes from companies that profit off of death, then later goes to work as one of their lobbyists. This thing was so evil, it could have been me. I realized the somewhat satisfying nature of this situation. I dished it out for so many years, and now, the first second I step out of my safe corporate bubble, the world decided to see if I could take it. I somehow weirdly felt like I deserved to get killed by this thing. And then I saw Danny's face in my mind again, and I knew that if I were going to go down, it wouldn't be without a fight. I missed him so badly. I needed to get past this monster and see him again. Everything would be okay if I could just see Danny again. I took one defiant step toward the dog-headed creature, feeling that nobody could stand in my way. My determination was too strong. Then, the Dogman roared. Oh, I ran. I ran in a stupid direction. Not toward home, and not toward the relative safety of my car. I ran in a pointless waste of a direction, but I ran, and then found myself back on the road. Panting and catching my breath, I saw our house about 150 feet down the road. I started shuffling in the direction of home, trying to get my second wind. The Dogman screamed so loud I fell forward on my face. It was behind me, only about 15 feet and getting closer with each step. It had a sick smirk on its face, and I wondered what it was planning to do. And I wondered what it was planning on doing to me. I took off one of my pumps and threw it at the monster. It bounced off his head, and I don't think the creature even noticed it. Getting to my feet, I threw the other shoe and ran. This time the Dogman let out a strange whimper. Looking back as I ran, I saw that my heel had caught the creature in one eye, and it was whining like a puppy. I guess even evil dog demons from hell have weak spots. I'm one of the few people alive who can honestly say that I made a Dogman go, ouch. But the thing about hurting a really mean, cranky monster is it only makes him angrier. Case in point, this particular Dogman who resumed his pursuit of me with great vigor and extreme fervor. That is to say, he was barking and howling or screaming, or however you'd describe that insane noise it made as it chased me. Danny heard the commotion and was in front of the house. As I ran past him, he was asking all sorts of questions, but my only answer was, "Get inside." Danny never saw what was chasing me. He never saw the Dogman. I'm not sure he even believes me, but I know that he knows that something happened that night. I was simply unable to continue to stay out there in the country after that. I'm a city girl. I realized that as much as I love Danny, I did not fit anywhere but inside civilization. I was willing to give up the relationship. That's how deeply I wanted to ensure that I'd never meet another Dogman in this lifetime. And so now, I live in a duplex penthouse apartment on the top of a very, very tall skyscraper. I have the downstairs, and Danny has the roof, where we've planted a small forest for him to paint. It has every kind of tree or plant he could want to draw. But there's one thing that mini forest will never have, and that's Dogman.
There you go. That was 10 scary Dogman stories, and now this video goes to 11. Fasten your seatbelts. We've got one more Dogman story starting now. I've been reading about Dogman online recently because I want to understand an encounter I had. I think I met this cryptid face to face, but this story is so strange and so different from other Dogman stories I hear online that maybe what I saw was something else. Maybe someone hearing this story will know better than I did what happened to me. All I know for certain is that when the weird phenomena all started, it was as far away from a Dogman encounter as possible. It seemed at first I was being haunted. Let me start at the beginning so that this makes more sense. A little while back, the company I worked for decided to relocate my whole department, which meant a promotion and a raise for me, but also meant I'd have to find a new home. I wanted a place that reflected my new, better position at the company, but I really didn't have the savings to get that kind of a house yet. I ended up finding a small but stately little 2-story, 2-bedroom, old-fashioned shingled house a bit out of town at the edge of a forest. It's basically inside the forest, really, and there are no other houses on the block. I was surprised to find it for rent at such a price. No lease, just pay month to month. That was great for me, because I hope to be able to afford something closer to town in half a year or so. Even though it was in such a rural location, the little house had an ornate chandelier downstairs, a fireplace, and a beautiful staircase leading up to the bedrooms. Each of the bedrooms had fireplaces too, but they looked as though they had been sealed up years earlier. There was central heating. The place had been kept up well, yet still looked old. Everything seemed original if it wasn't actually. It was not what you would expect to find out here, so I guessed it might have been a vacation home for a rich person when it was first built. All the windows on each floor had a lovely view. The woods and the mountains past them mesmerized me day or night. I never went out in them, though. I was too busy, really. This was just supposed to be a place for me to sleep in the short term. Then one night, I was laying in bed, and I heard a voice.
I can see you.
I sat up. Had I really heard that? It sounded like a girl or a woman. I looked around, and I saw nobody. Was that a hypnagogic or hypnopompic audio hallucination? It didn't sound as though it were right in my ear. It sounded like it was at the foot of my bed, to the right. I turned on the light next to the bed and got up to investigate the room. Since I found nothing, I figured it was in my head. Getting back into bed, I heard,
I can see you.
It was coming from the window. I raced over and looked out. Of course, it was the second-story window. There was nothing out there but air. I pulled it open and leaned out, looking down and up to see if anyone could possibly have been there, but saw nothing. I wasn't able to get much sleep that night or the next few nights either. At least once during the night, always at different times and always sounding like it was coming from different places. I would hear that voice.
I can see you.
Always saying the same thing. My boss pulled me into his office at work. It had become obvious I wasn't getting enough sleep. He was nice to me about it, but I could tell that behind his concern lurked impatience, and that I was messing up my promotion. I couldn't tell him that I was losing sleep because I was being haunted by an invisible peeping Thomasina. I made up some excuse and told him I'd get it taken care of. That day, at lunch, I started looking for a different place to live. I contemplated asking one of my buddies at work if I could stay over for a night. They're both married, and I knew it would be imposing. Plus, I couldn't think of any good reasons why I would need to be there besides, my house is haunted. On the drive home, I thought about getting sleeping pills, but didn't. It would be better if I could lick this naturally. I decided to try sleeping on the couch downstairs just to vary the routine. Maybe the ghost only haunted the second floor. No such luck. Just as I was falling asleep, I heard it again.
I can see you.
It was definitely from outside. This time I was prepared. I went to sleep with my jeans on. I slipped on my boots and coat and ran out the door around to the spot where I had heard the voice emanating from. There was some old snow around there, but there were no footprints in it. I tried stepping lightly on the snow to see if it was icy or soft, and I easily made a print there with my boot. If someone had been there, they would have left prints too. As I was processing this information, I heard, off in the distance, to my left.
I can see you.
Running, I tried to reach the location of the voice as fast as I could. It was in the forest past some trees. I ran for a while, then realized I was probably there, even past the point where it had happened. I still saw nothing. To my right,
I can see you.
Again, I ran after the voice. That girl and I were going to reach some closure tonight, no matter what I had to do. My job and my sanity were at stake, so I had to reach her.
I can see you.
To the left. Back I ran, retracing steps, then
I can see you.
forward. And to my right. On and on this went, until I realized I had absolutely no idea where I was in this forest, and I was getting pretty tired from the effort. When I reached this next location, if she wasn't there, I was going to have to give up and try to find my way home. Seeing nobody at all, I stopped running and bent down to catch my breath. Then, from just the other side of the large bush in front of me, I heard,
I can smell you.
Well, that was different. Forgetting how tired I felt a second earlier, I tore around the bush with all the speed I could manage, slicing my hands and cheek on some thorns in the process. I got to the other side and found nothing. Once again, nothing. I would have felt crazy if I weren't so annoyed. That's when something touched me on my back and I heard,
I can touch you.
Turning around, I saw no little girl. I saw no adult woman either. What I saw did not look like a girl or a ghost or even a human. What I saw was a monster. It had a long snout and it had pointed ears, but other than that, it did not match the normal description of a dogman. I'd say its snout was more rat-like than dog-like, but that might be because it constantly was twitching in a way that reminded me of a rodent. The teeth were more like a large canine or even feline, not like a rat or hare. Its eyes looked insane. It looked diseased. Parts of it looked like they were bubbling, as though it were having trouble maintaining its form, or maybe like something was crawling under its skin. Whatever it was, it screamed at me. Its hot, rotting breath searing my skin and turning my stomach. I ran. I ran and I ran. I had only seen it for a couple seconds. I had only seen it from the chest up, really. I ran till I was out of breath and then ran some more because I never wanted to see it again. I could hear the laughter of a girl as though it were echoing from all around me at once. Maybe it was more than one girl. Maybe it was an army of invisible girls. My heart was beating so hard I was convinced I was going to have an attack. And then I saw it. My car, the house, but mostly my car. I ran in the house, grabbed my clothes for tomorrow, my car keys, then drove off into the night. I Googled for a hotel on my phone, and that night I had my first decent sleep in weeks. So what exactly happened to me? Who or what was making that girl voice? Why would it be working with that Dogman creature? Was the Dogman creature itself something projecting that voice? I never saw it actually speak, and I couldn't imagine that rat snout forming words so delicately. Did I encounter one entity or two? Could it have been a shapeshifter, like a shaman or evil wizard from a native culture? Or was it just what it looked like? Some kind of monster dog rat thing. I've read some stuff about infrasound being able to cause hallucinations. Could the creature have been emitting low-frequency sound, and could my own mind have provided the details of what I heard? Or could the creature itself have been an illusion brought on by low-frequency infrasound? My only wounds from the event were inflicted by that unholy bush, so I don't have direct evidence proving that I encountered any physical being. And so, that's why I've been reading about Dogman a lot lately. Is that what I encountered? And if not, does anyone have any idea what this might have been? All I know is, the next time I hear a disembodied voice, I will not, in any way, investigate it.
Get your Bigfoot for President t-shirts, mugs, buttons. Get them now. CafePress.com/Bigfoot for President.